That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The sun hung low over the Nevada desert, casting long shadows across the vast expanse of Fort Irwin's training grounds. Dust swirled in lazy eddies around the boots of the assembled team, the air thick with the scent of dry earth and gun oil. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez stood at attention with her unit, her posture ramrod straight, the fabric of her camouflage uniform clinging slightly from the night's chill that hadn't fully burned off. At her side, Shadow, her Belgian Malinois K9 partner, sat motionless, his black eyes scanning the horizon with the unerring focus only a well-trained dog could muster. The bond between them was forged in years of shared ops, silent cues, instinctive trust, the kind that didn't need words. "Platoon, attention!" The command barked from Captain Harlan Reed, his voice cutting through the low hum of idling Humvees. Reed was a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, his face etched with lines that spoke of decisions made in split seconds. He paced the front of the formation, his polished boots kicking up faint puffs of sand. The team, 8 SEALs from Naval Special Warfare Group 1, including Elena, snapped to, their movements precise, synchronized. This was MOUT training, military operations in urban terrain, simulating house-to-house clears in hostile environments. Standard procedure drilled into them since Bud S. No deviations, no heroics, just execution. Elena felt the familiar weight of her M4 carbine across her chest, the strap adjusted just so. At 34, she was one of the few women to make it through the pipeline, her path paved with quiet determination rather than fanfare. Shadow's harness was secured to her vest, his breathing steady beside her. He'd been her shadow, literally, since her first deployment, detecting explosives before the team even smelled the cordite. In the rigid world of the SEALs, where ranks dictated every move, Shadow was the one constant that answered only to her. Objective: secure the mock village, neutralize threats, extract civilians if viable, Reed continued, his eyes sweeping the line. Vasquez, your team takes point on the east sector. K9 clears first. Standard protocol. No one enters without confirmation. He nodded toward the cluster of concrete block buildings ahead, props scarred from countless drills. Radios crackled faintly in the background, the ops center coordinating from a distant tent. The wind picked up, carrying the distant thump of rotor blades from a Black Hawk on standby. "Aye, sir," Elena replied, her voice level, professional. She glanced at her squad. Petty Officer Ramirez on her left, a sharpshooter with a steady hand. Chief Kowalski, the demo expert, fidgeting with his gear. They respected her not for her gender, but for the ops where she'd pulled them out of fire, once in Syria, when Shadow's nose had led them clear of an IED ambush. Loyalty here wasn't abstract. It was the guy next to you, the dog at your heel, the chain of command that kept them all alive. The whistle blew, and the team moved out in formation, boots thudding rhythmically on the packed dirt. Elena signaled Shadow with a subtle hand gesture. Forward, alert. He trotted ahead, ears pricked, his paws silent on the ground. The mock village loomed, faded walls pocked with simulated blast marks, windows boarded up like forgotten outposts in Fallujah. As they approached the first structure, the air grew heavier, the desert heat pressing down. Radio chatter filled her earpiece. "All clear on west flank, proceed." Inside the dim interior, shadows played across peeling paint and scattered debris, props meant to mimic a war-torn home. Shadow's nose worked the air, nostrils flaring at invisible scents. Elena swept her rifle methodically, covering angles. "Clear left," Ramirez murmured. They cleared room by room, the routine as ingrained as breathing. But in the final building something shifted, a faint whine from Shadow. Not his alert bark, but something deeper, urgent. He pawed at a collapsed section of wall, hidden behind a pile of rubble. "Stand down," Kowalski said, lowering his weapon. "That's not in the script." Elena knelt beside Shadow, her gloved hand on his flank, his body tensed, eyes fixed on the debris. Protocol said move on. Civilians were actors, threats were simunitions. But Shadow didn't lie. He sensed life, fear, the metallic tang of blood, even in training. She radioed it in. "Command, this is Vasquez, K9 indicating possible. Anomaly under rubble. Request permission to investigate." Static, then Reed's voice clipped. "Negative, Lieutenant. Training parameters don't include off-script searches. Regroup at rally point. Now." The order hung there, heavy as the dust settling around them. Elena's jaw tightened, but she rose, signaling the team to withdraw. Shadow hesitated, whining low, his nose burrowing toward the wall. In the SEALs, orders were oxygen. You didn't question them mid-breath. Yet as they stepped back into the sunlight, the dog's unease mirrored something in her gut. Routine training, yes, but what if the anomaly wasn't simulated? Back at the debrief tent, the team stood in formation again, sweat beading under their helmets. Reed reviewed the run. Times, hits, efficiencies. Praise for the West team, corrections for East. Elena's sector. "Vasquez, your delay cost 30 seconds. Stick to the plan." His eyes met hers, expectant. "Aye, sir," she said, but Shadow pressed against her leg, still restless. The base hummed on, trucks rumbling past, a distant siren from the medical bay. No one mentioned the wine, the pouring. It was procedure, after all. That night, as the desert cooled and stars pierced the sky, Elena lay in her bunk, Shadow curled at her feet. The official after-action report would log it as flawless. But in the quiet hours, doubts crept in like sand through a seal. What had her partner sensed? And why did following orders feel for the first time like leaving something behind? The next dawn brought orders for a live fire evolution, higher stakes, real ammo. But whispers circulated. An unannounced element had been added to the village sim, civilians in distress to test response times. Actors, they said. Still, Eleanor couldn't shake the image of that rubble, Shadow's unerring instinct. As the team geared up, radios buzzing with coordinates, she clipped Shadow's lead. Duty called, but conscience lingered, a quiet challenge to the chain that bound them all. In the vast machinery of the military, one dog's nose and one SEAL's resolve were about to collide with the unbreakable wall of protocol. And when they did, the fallout would echo far beyond the training grounds. The sun climbed higher over Fort Irwin, turning the desert into a furnace that baked the sand until it shimmered like molten glass. Elena Vasquez adjusted the straps of her plate carrier, the weight familiar yet heavier this morning, as if the night's unease had settled into her gear. Shadow paced at her side, his tags jingling softly with each step, his coat already dusted with fine grit. The team assembled at the armory, the metallic tang of lubricant and brass casings filling the air. Rifles were checked methodically, sights zeroed, magazines loaded with live rounds under strict supervision. No room for error here. This was the live fire phase, where simulations gave way to the raw edge of reality. Captain Reed stood at the head of the line, clipboard in hand, his voice steady as he ran through the brief. Evolution, urban assault with integrated K9 clears. East sector remains primary. Vasquez, your point again. Shadow leads entries, confirms threats. Civilians are marked. Extraction is secondary to securing the objective. Time on target, under 5 minutes. His eyes lingered on her for a beat longer than usual, perhaps registering the faint tension in her stance from yesterday's anomaly. But protocol was protocol. Doubts didn't factor into briefings. "Aye, sir," Eleanor responded, her tone even, betraying none of the questions that had kept her awake. Ramirez and Kowalski flanked her, their faces set in the mask of focus that SEALs wore like second skin. The chain of command was their lifeline, Reed to the ops officer, up to the base commander. Questioning it mid-mission meant chaos, and chaos got people killed. Shadow sat alert beside her, his ears twitching at the distant crack of small arms fire from another range. Their bond was unspoken, built on cues, a tilt of her head for search, a pat for stand down. He trusted her implicitly, and in return, she relied on his senses when human limits fell short. The convoy rolled out in a low growl of engines, Humvees kicking up plumes of dust that coated windshields and tongues alike. Elena rode shotgun in the lead vehicle, Shadow wedged between her and the driver, his nose pressed to the slit window, sampling the wind. Radio chatter filled the cab, coordinates confirmed, weather holding, medevac on standby. The mock village appeared ahead, its concrete facades baking under the relentless sun. The same scarred props from yesterday, now ringed with yellow safety tape, fluttering in the breeze. But something felt off. The air carried a sharper edge, not just heat, but a faint, acrid undercurrent that Shadow caught first, his body stiffening. They dismounted in formation, weapons up, advancing with the disciplined rhythm of boots on gravel. Elena signaled Shadow forward, his leash clipped short for control. He moved low, methodical, weaving through the entry points. The first two buildings cleared clean, empty rooms echoing with their footsteps, the only sounds the click of boot heels and the soft pant of the dog. "Clear," Ramirez whispered after each sweep, his rifle never dipping. Kowalski planted breaching charges on doors, the demo packs humming faintly before controlled pops granted entry. It was the third structure, the one with the rubble from yesterday, that pulled them up short. The pile remained untouched, a jagged mound of broken concrete and rebar, shadowed by the overhang. Shadow froze at its base, hackles rising, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Not the playful whine of training. This was his threat alert, sharp and insistent. Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice level. "Easy, boy. Search." He pawed insistently, nose burrowing into a crevice, his tail low. "Command, Vasquez. K9 positive on anomaly. Same location. Possible concealed threat. Request EOD sweep." Her transmission was crisp, gloved finger steady on the radio button. Static hissed back. Then Reed's reply, "Negative. Perimeter secure first. No deviations. Stick to the route. Rally at North End." The order landed like a weight on her shoulders. The team shifted uneasily behind her, Kowalski muttering under his breath about ghost calls. But eyes were on them now, observers from the ops center perched on a nearby ridge, binoculars glinting in the sun. Disobeying meant a mark on her record, a ripple up the chain that could end careers. Elena hesitated, her hand on Shadow's harness, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his flanks. In the SEALs, loyalty wasn't just to orders. It was to the team, to the instinct that had saved lives before. Yesterday's doubt gnawed deeper. What if this wasn't Sim? Reports had trickled in overnight. A migrant caravan spotted near the base perimeter, families crossing the barren stretches in search of safety. Unlikely, but Shadow didn't chase shadows. "Move out," she said finally, voice tight, pulling Shadow back. He resisted for a moment, whining, but followed, his eyes flicking toward the rubble as they withdrew. The rest of the evolution blurred, clears, mock extractions, the sharp reports of live fire echoing off the walls. They hit the time, secured the objective, but the victory felt hollow, the debrief a formality of nods and notes. Reed praised the efficiency, glossing over the delay. "Good work, East Team. Vasquez, keep the dog on leash. Instincts are assets, not detours." As the sun dipped toward afternoon, the team stripped gear in the armory. The clatter of magazines and holsters, a rhythmic underscore. Elena brushed sand from Shadow's coat, his fur warm and damp under her fingers. He leaned into her touch, but his gaze strayed toward the training grounds, restless. Ramirez clapped her shoulder on the way out. "Heard about the caravan rumors. You think—" He trailed off, respect in his silence. No pushing, just the quiet acknowledgement that bound them. Dinner in the mess hall was subdued, trays of MRE-style rations, the hum of fluorescent lights and low conversation. Elena sat with her squad, fork scraping against foil, but her mind replayed the growl, the pawing. Duty demanded obedience, the regs were clear. Unauthorized searches could compromise the entire op, yet conscience whispered of the cost. What if lives hung in that balance, hidden in the unforgiving desert? Night fell swiftly, the base lights casting long pools of yellow across the barracks. Elena walked Shadow on his evening circuit, the cool air carrying the faint scent of creosote bushes. He tugged toward the village perimeter, ears perked. She knelt, clipping him close. "What is it, partner?" In the silence, broken only by a distant coyote's call, she made her choice. Not defiance, not yet, but a quiet report to the duty officer, logged as routine observation. The chain would decide. But as she lay in her bunk later, Shadow's steady breathing a comfort at her feet, the radio on her nightstand crackled to life. "Vasquez, report to ops, immediate." The voice was Reed's, edged with urgency. Outside, bloodlights swept the grounds, and in the distance, the thump of rotors stirred the air. The anomaly wasn't buried anymore. It had surfaced, pulling the rigid world of protocol into the light of consequence. What Shadow had sensed wasn't a threat. It was a cry for help. Two small forms huddled in the shadows of the rubble, survivors of a border crossing gone wrong. And now, the SEAL who followed orders faced the test of her life. Ignore the breach or step beyond the line. Elena Vasquez's boots hit the gravel path outside the barracks with measured strides, the night air crisp against her skin, carrying the faint rotor wash from the approaching Black Hawk. Shadow trotted at her heel, his nails clicking softly, alert to the shift in routine. The ops tent glowed ahead, a squat canvas structure ringed by floodlights that cast stark shadows across the compound. Sentries nodded as she passed, their M4s slung low, faces impassive under Kevlar helmets. This wasn't a drill. The urgency in Reed's voice over the radio had stripped away any illusion of that. She pushed through the flap, the interior humid with the scent of stale coffee and printer ink. Maps pinned to boards showed the training grounds in red overlays, while a cluster of officers huddled around a central table, Captain Reed at the fore, his jaw set like granite. Beside him stood Major Ellis, the base JAG liaison, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tablet glowing in his hand. Two MPs flanked the entrance, their presence a silent reminder of the chain's unyielding grip. Shadow sat immediately at Elena's feet, his ears perked toward the tension humming in the air. "Vasquez," Reed said, not looking up from the tablet. "Your log entry flagged the anomaly. Explain." His tone was procedural, but the edge beneath it spoke of breached parameters, unauthorized reports, potential security lapses. "Sir," Elena began, standing at attention, her hands clasped behind her back. "During the live fire evolution, Shadow indicated the same rubble site as yesterday. I reported it per protocol, but proceeded with the objective. The evening observation was standard K9 handler procedure, nothing off-script." She kept her gaze steady on Reed's insignia, the eagle gleaming under the tent light. In the SEALs, truth was a weapon, wielded precisely. Evasion invited scrutiny that could unravel a career. Ellis cleared his throat, tapping his screen. "Routine or not, Lieutenant, this perimeter is secured for training only. Border Patrol handles migrant incursions. Your report triggered a sweep. Drones first, then ground team. They found 2 children, approximately 5 and 7 years old, dehydrated, concealed in the debris. No adults. Possible smugglers ditched them during the crossing." The words landed like suppressed rounds, precise and piercing. Elena's breath caught, but she held her posture, the weight of her sidearm a cold anchor at her hip. Shadow whined softly, pressing against her leg, as if echoing the unspoken. Children, real ones, not actors. The rumors of the caravan hadn't been idle. They'd breached the wire under the cover of night, hiding in the mock village's blind spots. Protocol screamed isolation, secure the site, notify ICE, stand down. But the image of small forms huddled in the dark rubble clawed at her, vulnerable, trusting her partner's nose over the indifference of orders. Reed's eyes met hers now, assessing. The general's been briefed. This is a national security matter, Vasquez. Training grounds aren't sanctuaries. Your K9's alert saved us a diplomatic headache, but pursuing it off mission, that's a violation waiting to happen. He paused, the tense generator humming in the silence. You're confined to quarters until investigation. Shadow stays with base kennels for evaluation. No contact. The order hit harder than expected. Shadow was her extension. Her instinct made flesh. Separating them felt like severing a limb. Sir, with respect, Shadow's trained for detection in all scenarios. The children need medical, not SEAL intervention? Ellis interjected, his voice clipped legal. Chain of command routes this up. You did your duty reporting it. Now stand down. The MPs shifted, a subtle cue to comply. Elena saluted sharply, the motion crisp despite the storm inside. Aye, sir. As she turned to exit, Shadow rose to follow, but an MP blocked him gently, leash in hand. The dog's eyes locked on hers, a low rumble in his throat. Not aggression, but protest. She knelt briefly, murmuring, Easy, partner, I'll be back. Her fingers brushed his ears, the fur warm and familiar. Before she straightened and walked out alone, the flap whispering shut behind her. The path back to barracks stretched under sodium lights, each step echoing her isolation. The base never slept, distant voices from the motor pool, the whine of a fuel truck. But tonight it felt vast, indifferent. In her quarters, she stripped off her uniform methodically, folding it with creases aligned. The ritual, a thin armor against the doubt. Duty had kept her alive through deployments, Fallujah's dust-choked streets, the Syrian nights where Shadow's alerts meant survival. But morality? That was the fracture line, where orders clashed with the human cost. Those children, scared alone, weren't threats. They were echoes of the civilians she'd extracted in ops. Lives pulled from rubble not by protocol, but by choice. Sleep evaded her, the bunk's thin mattress unyielding. By 0400, her radio buzzed again. Not Reed, but Ramirez, voice low in the static. Elena, it's bad. Med team's on site, but the kids, they're critical. Dehydration, exposure, border patrols en route, but the general's pissed, says it compromises training integrity, words spreading. You okay? She sat up, the cool air raising gooseflesh on her arms. Following orders, Ramirez. That's all. But the words tasted hollow. Loyalty in the teams wasn't blind. It was forged in the grey zones, where one soldier's stand rippled to protect the rest. Shadow's separation gnawed. Without him, her reports were just words, not evidence. Dawn broke grey and unrelenting, the desert wind rattling her window. Assembly call came over the speakers, but her confinement held. She watched from the door as the team mustered without her, Kowalski's silhouette familiar in the line. Whispers carried on the breeze, about the breach, the dog, the woman who'd sensed it first. The chain was stirring, investigations pending, but the moral test loomed larger. Ignore the pull, or defy the quarantine for a closer look. By mid-morning, the Black Hawk's thump returned, medevac lifting off with the children aboard. Elena paced her room, the walls closing in, until a knock shattered the quiet. It was Ellis, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. Vasquez, the general wants your full debrief, in person. And the K9's cleared for you. But this stays contained. Relief mixed with wariness as she geared up, clipping Shadow's lead in the kennel shadows. His tail thumped once, forgiveness in his eyes. Together, they headed to the command center, the base's eyes turning subtly their way. The violation was public now, Witnesses from the sweep, logs time-stamped, the story leaking through ranks. What began as a handler's instinct had cracked the facade of routine, forcing the institution to reckon with the lives beyond the wire. Elena's choice crystallized, obedience or the quiet courage to carry the weight of what her partner had found. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The command center loomed at the heart of Fort Irwin, a reinforced bunker of concrete and steel buried under a low-slung roof, its entrance guarded by chain link and floodlights that hummed like distant generators. Elena Vasquez approached with Shadow at her side, his leash taut in her grip, the dog's steps syncing with hers in a rhythm honed by years of tandem patrols. The desert air had warmed by late morning, carrying the sharp bite of jet fuel from the airstrip, mingling with the earthy scent of Shadow's coat, still carrying traces of the kennel's straw. Sentries at the gate saluted crisply, their eyes flicking to the Malinois with a mix of respect and caution. K9s were assets, but anomalies like this one stirred the base's undercurrents. Inside, the air was cooler, conditioned and sterile, the walls lined with monitors flickering grid maps and live feeds from perimeter cams. General Harlan Thorpe sat at the head of the conference table, a broad-shouldered figure in starched fatigues. His silver hair cropped close, face weathered from decades in command. Flanking him were Reed, Ellis, and a cluster of aides, ops specialists with notebooks open, the scratch of pens underscoring the gravity. No cameras, no press. This was internal, classified under base security protocols. But word had spread like dust on the wind, the SEAL handler, the dog, the hidden survivors. Whispers in the mess hall, sidelong glances during muster, the chain's invisible threads pulling tight. "Vasquez," Thorpe said, his voice gravelly, gesturing to a chair opposite him. "At ease, sit." She complied, Shadow settling beside her with a soft thud of paws on linoleum, his head resting near her boot. The general's eyes, sharp behind half-moon glasses, assessed her not as a subordinate, but as the fulcrum of this breach. "Your reports flagged the site. Walk me through it from the first alert." Elena leaned forward slightly, her hands flat on the table, posture erect but open. "Sir, during MOUT training, Shadow indicated the rubble in the East Sector building. Standard K9 protocol. I radioed it, but proceeded per Captain Reed's orders. Evening log was routine observation, perimeter integrity." She recounted the details methodically. The whine, the pawing, the growl during live fire. No embellishment, facts as filed, timestamps aligning with drone logs. Shadow's instincts weren't whims. They were calibrated tools, certified by Naval Special Warfare's veterinary teams. But here, in this room, they clashed with the regs. Training zones off-limits to external incursions, handlers bound to mission parameters. Thorpe nodded slowly, flipping through a dossier, her service record, glowing with commendations, Syria extractions, IED detections that saved platoons. Impressive history, Lieutenant. But this isn't a hot zone. It's Nevada soil, under DoD jurisdiction. Those children, Mexican nationals, per prelim ID from their effects, crossed illegally. Border Patrol's claim now, but your involvement complicates it. He slid a tablet across. Grainy drone footage. And time-stamped 02:30 hours, showing small figures scrambling into the mock village under moonlight, then vanishing into the debris. Smugglers' tracks led away, abandoning the young ones to the elements. Dehydration had set in fast. Medivac reports noted IVs and hypothermia risks, the 5-year-old girl seizing en route. The room fell quiet, save for the low whir of vents. Reed shifted, his earlier edge softened by the visuals, human frailty piercing the armor of procedure. Ellis jotted notes, but his glance toward Eleanor held a flicker of something unspoken. the JAG's burden of balancing law with the unwritten code of the ranks. Moral tension coiled here, visible in the general's furrowed brow, duty to secure borders versus the SEAL ethos of never leaving anyone behind, even if they weren't cleared for extraction. "Sir," Elena ventured, voice steady, Shadow's alert was on point. "If we'd cleared it mid-evolution—" "Speculation," Ellis cut in smoothly, legal precision his shield. "Protocol exists for a reason. Unauthorized pursuit could escalate to international incident, smugglers, cartels watching our responses. Your confinement was precautionary. Investigations underway. MPs will interview the team, review all logs." He paused, eyes on Shadow, who met his gaze unflinchingly. "The dog's evaluation clears him. No false positives, but handlers don't operate solo." Thorpe steepled his fingers, the medals on his chest catching the fluorescent glow. "This ripples, Vasquez. Base commanders facing queries from higher, DHS, even state. Training integrity's at stake. If every instinct overrides orders, we lose discipline." Yet beneath the reprimand lay a subtle nod to legacy. Her stand, however inadvertent, had prompted the sweep that found them alive. No one survived such crossings alone in the desert, they said, until a woman's resolve and a dog's nose proved otherwise. The general leaned back. "Debriefs on record. You're released from quarters, but stand by for tribunal if charges arise. Possible Article 92, dereliction. Shadow returns to duty under your watch." She saluted. The motion held a fraction longer, a silent acknowledgement of the weight. "Understood, sir." As she rose, Shadow stood with her, tail low but steady. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly, the compound buzzing with subdued activity, techs calibrating drones, a Humvee convoy prepping for patrol. Ramirez waited by her quarters, arms crossed, his sharpshooter's eyes scanning for threats. "Heard the brass grilled you. Kid's stable. Girl's name Sophia. Boy's Mateo. Medbay says they'll pull through." Elena unclipped Shadow's leash, letting him roam the sparse grass patch, his nose questing the air. "Protocol saved them, Ramirez, not me." But the words rang false even to her. The team's murmurs painted her as the catalyst, the SEAL who sensed what orders ignored. Kowalski joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "Word's out. Handlers from other units asking about Shadow's training. If this goes tribunal, it'll echo. Retrain K9 protocols for border sims." The suggestion hung, a seed of reform amid the scrutiny. Public reckoning brewed, witnesses from the sweep corroborating her logs, aides leaking sanitized details to contain fallout. Elena felt the institution's gaze, loyalty tested not in fire, but in the quiet tribunal of conscience. Duty bound her to silence, but the children's faces, glimpsed in med reports, tugged at the moral core. Compassion over compliance, even if it cost her stripes. By afternoon, the base stirred with the ripple, briefings adjusted, perimeters reinforced with extra patrols. Eleanor walked Shadow through the motor pool, the clang of tools and radio static a familiar cadence. A young corpsman approached, hesitant. "Ma'am, the kids. They had a toy, a little truck, found it in the rubble. Thought you should know." He handed it over, plastic scarred by sand, a child's anchor in the chaos. She pocketed it, the gesture small but seismic, human vulnerability piercing the rank's armor. As evening fell, the desert cooling to a whisper, Elena reviewed her own logs in the dim light of her quarters. Shadow curled at her feet, his breathing even, trust unbroken. The tribunal loomed, a formal inquisition into her deviation, but in that silence, integrity crystallized, the cost of following orders when lives whispered from the shadows. The chain would judge, but her legacy, forged in defiance's quiet echo, might just bend it toward justice. The wind picked up outside, carrying the faint cry of a siren from the med bay. a reminder that some salvations demanded more than obedience. Elena's hand rested on Shadow's head, the bond a steady pulse against the gathering storm. The tribunal chamber in Fort Irwin's administrative wing was a stark affair, its walls panelled in institutional grey, the air heavy with the faint polish of wooden benches and the underlying tang of recycled ventilation. Elena Vasquez entered at precisely 0900 hours, her uniform pressed to razor edges, boots polished to a subdued gleam that caught the overhead fluorescence. Shadow walked beside her, his harness clipped to a short lead, his presence cleared by veterinary eval, but now a point of contention in the proceedings. The corridor outside had buzzed with subdued activity, MPs in crisp, starched shirts, aides shuffling folders, but inside silence reigned, broken only by the soft click of her heels on the tile. Major Ellis presided from the elevated bench, flanked by two panel members, a stern-faced colonel from base ops and a Navy captain with a dossier of border security creds. Captain Reed sat to one side as the investigating officer, his posture rigid, eyes forward. No jury, no theatrics. This was Article 92 in motion, failure to obey order or regulation, a UCMJ staple that could strip rank or worse. Elena took her seat at the respondents' table, Shadow settling under it with a quiet huff, his warmth a grounding pressure against her calf. The General's shadow loomed indirectly. Thorpe had recused to higher command, but his influence threaded every glance. "Lieutenant Vasquez," Ellis began, his voice modulated for the record, tablet open before him. "This hearing addresses your actions during MOUT evolutions on dates in question, specifically deviations from mission parameters and unauthorized perimeter observations. State your understanding of the charges for the record." "Sir," Eleanor replied, her tone level, hands folded on the table's edge, "I understand the allegation of dereliction through non-compliance with direct orders to stand down from anomaly investigation. My reports were logged per K9 handler protocol, and all actions prioritized team safety and objective completion." She kept her gaze on Ellis, not wavering, the words measured from nights reviewing regs in her bunk. Shadow shifted slightly, nose twitching at the room's stale air, but remained still, trained composure mirroring her own. The colonel leaned in, reviewing a stack of printouts, after-action reports, drone logs, medevac transcripts. "Your K9's alerts were noted, Lieutenant. Commendable detection, but protocol dictates escalation through chain, not personal pursuit. The children, Sofia and Mateo Ramirez, were secured by standard sweep post your report. Your involvement risked operational security. Explain the evening log entry." Elena paused, the memory surfacing. The cool night air, Shadow's insistent tug toward the perimeter. "Sir, as certified handler, I conduct routine environmental assessments with Shadow to maintain alert status. The log documented observed disturbances, faint tracks, not pursuit. Border Patrol was notified via base channels." Truth, unvarnished, the regs supported handlers' discretion in low-threat zones, but here it blurred into grey, where instinct met illegality. Reed cleared his throat, his testimony cued. "Captain, during live fire I issued clear stand-down. Vasquez complied on sight, but the subsequent log, it flagged resources unnecessarily. Training grounds are DoD exclusive. Migrant activity falls to DHS." His words carried no malice, just the weight of command, loyalty to the system that had forged him. Yet Elena caught the subtle flicker in his eyes, the shared ops where bending rules had saved lives. The panel murmured, pens scratching, as Ellis projected the drone footage on a wall screen. The children's small forms emerging from rubble, dust-caked and trembling, medics swarming with stretchers and IV lines. Human emotion pierced the formality then, Sofia's wide eyes, Mateo's clutched toy truck, the one the corpsman had passed to Elena. The boy had whispered "gracias" in broken English during intake, a sound that echoed in her mind like radio static. Shadow whined low under the table, sensing the tension, his paw pressing her boot. She resisted the urge to reassure him, restraint her armor in this arena. "Evidence shows you're alert," prompted the discovery, the captain noted, his voice softening fractionally. "No casualties, timely extraction. But the Ripple perimeter breaches up 20% in SIM reports since. Smugglers adapt. Your instinct broadcasts vulnerabilities." He tapped the screen off, the room dimming slightly. Moral tension coiled tighter, duty to orders versus the compassion that had pulled civilians from fire in real ops. Elena's service record lay open. Medals for Syria, where Shadow's nose cleared a school amid rubble, extracting families under fire. Legacy whispered here, the quiet cost of integrity in rigid halls. Ellis adjourned for deliberation, the panel retreating to a side room, leaving Elena with Reed in the antechamber. The space was sparse, folding chairs, a water cooler gurgling softly, the distant thump of a helo on approach. "This could go either way, Vasquez," Reed said quietly, no rank between them now. "Generals pushing for reprimand sets precedent. But the kids, they're stable. Foster placement pending thanks to your flag." He paused, glancing at Shadow, who watched them both with unwavering focus. "Team's got your back. Ramirez logged a statement, says the dog saved more than he's cost." Gratitude tightened her throat, but she nodded crisply. "Appreciate it, sir. Just doing the job." Loyalty in the ranks wasn't fanfare. It was these moments, hands clasped in silence, the bond holding against scrutiny. Outside, the desert wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of heated sand through vents. Kowalski waited in the hall, thumbs hooked in his belt, his demo-scarred hands a testament to shared risks. Heard the footage shook him. If it reforms K9 border drills, worth the heat. Deliberation stretched to 1300, the base's midday hum filtering in, truck engines rumbling, a PA announcement for muster. When Ellis returned, his expression was etched neutral. "Lieutenant, the panel finds insufficient evidence for formal charges. Cautionary note on record, adhere strictly to escalation protocols. However, commendation for detection. Recommend cross-training integration for K9 units in perimeter SIMs." Relief washed subtle, no outburst. Elena saluted, the motion precise. "Thank you, sir." As they exited, Shadow's tail gave a single wag, his nose bumping her hand. The base felt altered, observers nodding with newfound respect, whispers evolving from scandal to symbol. Ramirez fell in step, clapping her shoulder lightly. "Told you. Now it's legacy time. Handlers briefing next week. Your input." The children's salvation rippled outward. DHS queries on joint ops. Vets pushing for enhanced alerts in training zones. Elena walked toward the motor pool, Shadow at heel, the sun glinting off his tags. Institutional justice had bent, not broken, reforms seeded in one handler's stand, but consequence lingered. Thorpe's office summoned her that afternoon, the general's door ajar, maps of border routes spread wide. "Vasquez," he said, not rising, "this changes protocols. Your dog's nose might just rewrite the book." She stood at attention, the weight of transformation settling. Duty and morality had clashed, but in the quiet victory, conscience emerged stronger. Outside, the helo's rotors spun up, carrying echoes of lives pulled from shadows. 2 children, carried out not by orders, but by the unyielding trust between a SEAL and her partner. The afternoon light slanted through the commander's blinds, casting bars across the desk, where General Thorpe reviewed the tribunal summary. Elena remained at parade rest, Shadow motionless beside her, the room's air conditioner whispering against the desert's encroaching heat. This wasn't rebuke, it was reckoning's next phase, where individual acts forged institutional paths. General Thorpe's office carried the weight of command in every detail. The polished oak desk scarred from years of briefings, walls lined with framed citations and maps pinned with red flags marking border hot zones. Elena held her position, eyes fixed on the eagle insignia above the general's nameplate. The faint scent of aged paper and aftershave mingling with the cool draft from the vents. Shadow's presence grounded her, his steady breathing a counterpoint to the subtle tension coiling in the room. This summons wasn't for judgment. The tribunal had cleared that air. Instead, it was the quiet machinery of change grinding forward, where one handler's persistence could recalibrate the gears. "Vasquez?" Thorpe said finally, setting the summary aside with a deliberate motion, his voice low and measured, like orders issued over a secure line. "The panel's ruling stands. No charges. But this incident, it's a pivot point. DHS is looping in, wanting joint protocols for K9 integration along training perimeters. Your logs, Shadow's alerts, they're the blueprint." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly, his gaze shifting to the dog, who met it without flinching, ears perked in quiet vigilance. "Sir," Elena replied, her tone even, "I'm honored to contribute. Shadow's training emphasizes multi-threat detection, explosives, narcotics, human distress. Adapting it for border sims could prevent repeats." She kept her words precise, drawing from the handler's manual she'd pored over in her quarters, the pages dog-eared from late-night reviews. Moral tension lingered here. Her initial hesitation to push against orders had nearly buried the discovery, but reporting it, quietly through channels, had unearthed lives. Now that choice rippled upward, challenging the rigid separation between military ops and humanitarian edges. Thorpe nodded, sliding a folder across the desk. Preliminary briefs from Naval Special Warfare, outlines for a cross-unit exercise incorporating migrant scenarios into MOUT drills. You'll lead the pilot. Reed's team supports, with input from Border Patrol handlers. Start with evaluations. Shadow's metrics against standard sweeps. If it scales, it becomes doctrine. His eyes held hers, a rare glint of approval breaking through the commander's reserve. In the SEALs, legacy wasn't medals alone. It was the protocols you etched into the system, ensuring the next generation navigated the grays with sharper tools. Elena accepted the folder, her gloved fingers brushing the cover, the paper crisp under her touch. "Aye, sir. We'll execute clean." As she saluted and turned to leave, Shadow rose fluidly, his tags jingling faintly in the hush. Outside, the corridor stretched under harsh fluorescence, MPs at posts exchanging nods that carried newfound weight, respect earned not in combat, but in the tribunal's glare. Ramirez waited by the exit, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, his uniform dusted from morning PT. "General buy-in? That's big, Elena. Kowalski's already sketching demo mods for the Sim Village, hidden compartments for civilians in future runs." She fell into step with him, Shadow trotting between them, the base's midday rhythm enveloping them. The low growl of Humvees idling in the motor pool, radio chatter crackling from open doors, the distant snap of flags in the wind. "It's a start," she said, voice low. "But the kids, Sophia and Mateo, they're the real measure. Medbay update?" Human emotion surfaced in the question, subtle as a hand steadying a rifle, the toy truck still in her pocket. A talisman of vulnerability that orders couldn't dismiss. "Stable," Ramirez confirmed, his stride matching hers. "Foster systems got them. Siblings, turns out. Border patrols piecing the story. Parents separated by coyotes during the cross. Your flag got them airlifted in time. Docs say another day in that rubble." He trailed off, the implication hanging like desert haze. Loyalty bound them here, not just to the team, but to the unseen costs of the line, duty's cold edge softened by conscience's pull. By afternoon, the pilot briefing convened in the ops tent, canvas walls fluttering slightly in the breeze, the air thick with the aroma of fresh-printed handouts and cooling coffee from a percolator. Elena stood at the front, Shadow at her side, addressing a mixed group. Her squad, Border Patrol agents in tactical vests, and a veterinary tech scribbling notes. Standard K9 clears integrate scent lines for human presence, she explained, gesturing to a projected diagram of the training grounds, the rubble site marked in yellow. Shadow's protocol, initial alert, handler confirmation, then chain escalation. No solo pursuits, team covers, EOD follows. Questions came measured, an agent on false positives in arid conditions, Kowalski on integrating breaching with dog leads. Elena fielded them with restraint, her voice steady over the hum of the projector. Shadow demonstrated once, on cue sniffing a prop cache hidden under tarps, his paw tapping insistently, instinct distilled to procedure. The group watched in silence. The bond between woman and dog, a quiet testament, trust forged in silence, unbreakable under scrutiny. As the session wrapped, Ellis approached, tablet tucked under his arm, his legal poise yielding to a nod of acknowledgement. JAGS endorsing the pilot, sets precedent for dual jurisdiction alerts. Your tribunal testimony helped, showed the regs can flex without breaking. Consequence echoed in his words. The institution, learning not punishing, the moral choice that had exposed its blind spots. Eleanor returned the nod, feeling the shift. Reform not as revolution, but as incremental justice, rippling through careers and commands. Evening brought a walk along the perimeter fence, the sun dipping low, painting the wire in golden hues. The desert stretching endless beyond. Shadow ranged ahead on his long lead, nose questing the sand, while Elena's thoughts turned inward. The children's rescue had tested her, obedience versus the pull to act, the cost of integrity in a system that prized uniformity. Yet here in the quiet, redemption took shape. Mentorship for Ramirez, who eyed handler quals. Protocols that might save others from the shadows. A radio on her belt buzzed softly. Medbay confirmation. Sophia and Mateo, discharged to care, their small hands waving from a van window earlier that day. She knelt to unclip Shadow, his fur warm under her palm, the bond a steady anchor. "Good work, partner," she murmured, the words lost to the wind. The base lights flickered on, a constellation of duty points, but tonight they felt less confining, legacy blooming in the spaces between orders. Whispers among the ranks had evolved. Not scandal, but symbol. The woman seal who'd carried 2 lives from impossibility, her steps echoing toward broader horizons. In the barracks, as stars wheeled overhead, Elena reviewed the pilot outlines by lamplight, Shadow curled nearby. The chain had bent, conscience prevailing in measured reform, but one ripple remained. A quiet visit to the children, cleared through channels to close the circle. Duty and morality intertwined at last. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Vasquez reach those who still believe in honor. The days following the pilot briefing blurred into a cadence of structured change, the base's rhythm adapting like a unit to new orders. Elena Vasquez moved through it with the quiet efficiency of her training, her mornings starting in the kennels, where Shadow's evaluations fed directly into the evolving protocols. The air there was thick with the scent of damp hay and antiseptic, the low whines of other canines underscoring the handler's murmured commands. She ran drills with him under the watchful eyes of Border Patrol liaisons, their vests marked with green insignia, clipboards in hand as they timed responses to simulated distress signals buried in sand mock-ups. "Alert confirmed," Elena would say, her voice level over the radio. As Shadow poured a concealed prop, a child's shoe, scented with synthetic fear pheromones. No deviations now. The chain had woven her instincts into procedure, a seamless integration that honored the gray zones without unraveling the whole. By midweek, the reform took tangible shape. General Thorpe's office issued the directive, enhanced K-9 sweeps as standard for all perimeter training, with cross-agency briefings mandatory. Elena's input shaped the core, escalation trees that routed handler alerts directly to joint ops centers, bypassing the isolation of solo logs. Reed oversaw implementation, his briefings in the ops tent crisp and forward-leaning, the canvas walls echoing with the scratch of markers on whiteboards. Vasquez leads the East Sector demo next cycle, he announced to the assembled teams, his nod to her carrying the weight of earned trust. Ramirez and Kowalski flanked the group, their postures relaxed but attentive. The squad's loyalty a subtle undercurrent in their exchanged glances. No fanfare, just the procedural grind, gear checks, scent line calibrations, the hum of drones overhead mapping blind spots in the mock village. Human vulnerability lingered in the margins, a quiet thread pulling at the edges of duty. The medbay visit was cleared through Ellis's channels, a low-profile escort to an off-base transitional center where Sophia and Mateo waited under watchful care. Elena arrived at dusk, the facility's low buildings ringed by chain link and desert scrub, the air cooling to carry the faint chlorine tang from an indoor pool. Shadow stayed in the Humvee with Ramirez, his presence too potent a reminder for the children's fragile recovery. She entered alone, boots soft on the linoleum, her civilian clothes, a simple blouse and slacks, feeling foreign after weeks in fatigues. The siblings sat on a worn couch in a common room, Sophia clutching a stuffed bear, Mateo fiddling with a puzzle, their faces rounder now from IV fluids and steady meals. A social worker nodded from the corner, her tablet glowing with case notes. "They've been asking about the dog lady," she said softly, stepping back to give space. Eleanor knelt to their level, the motion deliberate, no rush to bridge the gap. "I'm Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but measured, like briefing a green recruit. "Shadow says hello. He found you because you're tough, like soldiers." Sophia's eyes widened, her small hand extending the bear tentatively. "El perro saved us?" The words tumbled out in a mix of Spanish and English, accented by the border's harsh lessons. Elena nodded, accepting the toy, her fingers brushing the child's, a fleeting contact heavy with unspoken rescue. Mateo looked up, his gaze steady. "No one came. We hid. Then lights." He mimed the drone's sweep, the medevac's roar, the chain of events her alert had ignited. No tears, no drama, just the raw recounting of survival, mirrored in their quiet resilience. Eleanor shared a story then, brief and restrained. A deployment where Shadow pulled a team from shadows, emphasizing trust over fear. The visit lasted 20 minutes, protocol-bound, but in that space, morality affirmed itself, compassion not as weakness, but as the core strength orders sometimes overlooked. Back at base, the encounter rippled through her squad like after-action notes. Ramirez met her at the gate, Shadow leaping from the vehicle to press against her legs, his wet nose bumping her hand in greeting. "How'd it go?" he asked, falling into step as they headed to quarters, the night sky pricked with stars, the perimeter lights casting long pools across the gravel. "They're fighters," Elena replied, her tone even. The bear tucked in her pocket like the toy truck, a symbol of lives bridged beyond the wire. Kowalski joined from the armory, his gear bag slung over one shoulder. "Heard the pilot's greenlit for expansion. Your call on the next run? Add distress variants?" The question carried mentorship's edge. Ramirez had signed for handler quals, Kowalski volunteering for cross-training. The incident forging quiet guides in the ranks. The transformation unfolded in increments. A revised field manual circulated by week's end. Elena's name cited in the acknowledgements, not as hero, but as catalyst. The institution absorbed the lesson, its rigid hierarchy flexing to incorporate K9 empathy into border simulations, reducing response lags in real incursions. Witnesses from the tribunal, MPs, aides, now nodded with deference in passing, the story evolving from breach to benchmark. Thorpe summoned her once more, the office unchanged, but his directive firmer. "Scale it, Vasquez. Make it doctrine." She saluted, shadow at heel, the weight of legacy settling like a well-fitted harness, moral strength etched into the system, ensuring no child faded into rubble unseen. In the quiet of her bunk that night, Shadow curled close, his flank rising and falling in sync with hers, the base's distant hum a lullaby of order renewed. Elena's hand rested on his head, the bond a testament. Loyalty's quiet power, turning defiance's spark into enduring light. Weeks later, the first joint exercise unfolded under a relentless sun. Teams from SEALs and Border Patrol advancing in tandem, Shadow leading the clear with unerring precision. Elena watched from point, rifle steady, as alerts flowed seamlessly up the chain, no hesitations, no shadows left unchecked. Sophia and Mateo's faces flickered in her mind, safe now, their survival a ripple that reshaped the horizon. The woman SEAL had walked out carrying more than children. She'd borne the weight of change, proving that in the ranks conscience could command as surely as any order. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of They Said No One Survived. Until the woman SEAL walked out carrying 2 children. See you in the next one. In the end, discipline proved not a chain, but a bridge, linking duty to the lives it was meant to protect.